Welcome to Soft Pass, hosted by John Michaels, a 30-year veteran tour manager and sound engineer for some of entertainment's most well-known touring acts, and Alan Tillis, a mild-mannered writer and entertainment lawyer by day and a rowdy musician by night. Join them as they sit down with songwriters, musicians, producers, managers, and touring professionals to talk about what really goes on behind the scenes in the studios, offices, and on stage in the entertainment industry.
Welcome to another edition of Soft Pass. I'm John Michaels, and with me is my co-host, Alan Tillis. Alan, we have a pretty historical show with some guests who have really seen it all. And this episode, we're going to go pretty deep, like everything from Atlanta Rhythm Section to Frank Zappa and everything in between.
In 1967, I'm walking around a Baltimore neighborhood with my friend Mark Farfel, and I heard the Turtles Happy Together for the first time, and I was immediately hooked on the band. When I had the chance to get the keyboard player that collaborated with Mark Volman and Howard Kalin for many years, I jumped at the chance. Our guest, Andy Cahan, has just released his autobiography, The Most Famous Musician You've Never Heard Of. And he's going to talk about playing with the Turtles, Jimi Hendrix, 3/4 of the Beatles, Little Richard, Chuck Berry, and so many more. It's with great pleasure I welcome Andy to our show.
Well, thank you so very much, Alan. I really appreciate it. Can you hear me all right?
We hear you great.
Okay, good.
And the sirens of the police coming to get you as well.
Yes.
See, this is why we edit the show.
Well, that's why I'm wearing 2 masks and 3 pairs of sunglasses and 4 hats.
We'll try to keep you safe.
Okay.
Hey, I'm missing Beat Bobby Flay for this.
That's the voice right there of our second guest. He's originally from New York City, but he spent most of his life in the Tampa area. He's known for being the original lead singer of the Atlanta Rhythm Section. He has the odd privilege of being the first member to quit the band, but also the last man standing.
Right.
And we'll get to that as we go. What a lot of people might not know about him is that he was also in the Candymen, which was Roy Orbison's band. Another band he was in called Beaver Teeth have one of my favorite album titles of all time, Damn It. He's worked with Billy Joe Thomas, or BJ Thomas as we know him, but he's no stranger to the working man's plight either, as he's held a 9-to-5 for over 20 years and raised a family through the course of all this. And he still gets up on the stage to sing ARS's hits with heart and soul, even though the band had the audacity to record those songs during the period of his absence.
Bastards.
Yeah. He feels that he owes it to the fans to deliver each and every performance. His biggest fear is being accused of loitering on stage. On this episode, we're going to get to hear some history and stories and have some laughs with a guy who's been doing this over 50 years, but is definitely still a teenager at heart. He's come a long way from shining shoes at Northgate Plaza. Please welcome the still very talented and always charming Mr. Rodney Justo to the show.
Thrilled to be here.
You see how I had to build that up because of Andy? So, Rodney, let's kick it off with you. I'm going to just sort of summarize things here, and you can let me know if I'm off because I want to just jump into the good stuff. In the early 60s, you, along with a bunch of other Tampa area hotshots, made up this sort of super group of musicians called the Mystics.
Yeah.
Who were called upon to back traveling artists as they came on tour. Now, this is back before artists started taking their own bands with them or bands toured. So you meet Roy Orbison while he's...
That's easy for you to say.
You meet Roy while he's with Fred Carter, and then Roy brings you up to Nashville in '64 to make a record of a Fred Carter song, a couple songs, one of them being Miss Brown. And that song was cut 2 days after the Beatles invaded Ed Sullivan. So, of course, that changed everything forever, and Miss Brown was not the smash hit that Roy thought it would be. And then beyond that, you go on to tour with Roy from 65 to 70 as part of the Candymen, replacing Bobby G, who was in that position, and he ended up with his own breakout hit.
Right.
This is sort of a decline in Roy's career. There's a lot of loss and tragedy going on. He loses his wife, his kids, his house burns down. And it just seems so tragic because everything I've read about Roy and all the people who are around him say that he was the nicest guy in show business, just the kindest soul. And what was that like being around him during those times? Was it ever difficult because of what was going on around him, or did he just keep all that in a bubble?
Well, I'll tell you a couple stories. I'll try to make them quick. First of all, when I left my band to go to work with Roy, like I said, we backed up every artist that came to town, even before bands became popular, when single artists work. And we worked with the Four Seasons, and I went to a diner after the show with Frankie Valli, and he ordered a cheese omelet. And he says, man, this is the best cheese omelet I've had since I left New Jersey. Now, I'd never even heard of a cheese omelet, but I was so happy that Tampa had something as good as New Jersey. So I told him, I says, look, this is my last day with my band. I'm going to work with Roy Orbison. He says, you're going to work for the nicest man in show business. I went, really? Now, I'd already known him, but I didn't know he had that kind of reputation. Fast forward to 1987, I think it was, when Roy dies. And I pick up Rolling Stone, and there's a picture of him on the cover of Rolling Stone. And the first paragraph says something like, Roy Orbison was the sweetest guy in rock and roll. And I thought to myself, man, in this business, the music business, all these years later, from Frankie Valli telling me he's the nicest guy in the business to Rolling Stone saying he was the sweetest guy in rock and roll, that'll give you an indication of what he was as a human being. He really, really was what you see. He was just a nice guy.
Even his on-stage demeanor seemed to exude that nice guy ethic. It seemed like it really did come through to everybody.
Well, he was a really quiet kind of guy from West Texas. I remember him telling me that one year he made $500. That's all he made for the whole year. And people were calling him to beat him up about bills and get paid. And he says, Rod, no, I just told him real nice. At the end of the month, I was drawing I was getting all the people I owe money to, and I'm putting their name on a hat. I'm going to draw their name out. And if they don't treat me real nice, I ain't going to put their name in a hat. You know what I said? That tells you everything about him.
Wow. Hey, Andy?
Yeah.
Tell us about the time Jimmy Webb lied to the judge for John Lennon.
Oh, my God. Well, everybody knows the famous photograph that's been published of John Lennon and Harry Nilsson at the Troubadour. John Lennon is being attacked by the bouncer, and Harry Nilsson has his fists up, protecting John. What happened was, real quick, May Pang and Keith Moon, Ringo Starr, Harry Nilsson, and Peter Lawford were all there at the Troubadour to see the Smothers Brothers. They all had brandy Alexanders, and after about 4 or 5 rounds of brandy Alexanders, John Lennon reached into May Pang's purse and pulled out a Tampax and strapped it around his forehead, which upset the waitress. So the waitress called the bouncer. And that's when this altercation happened, and John Lennon and Harry Nilsson were tossed out of the Troubadour onto the sidewalk. And then when the police came and arrested John Lennon and Harry Nilsson, or whatever the hell happened, they had to go to court. So Jimmy Webb was not there, but they used Jimmy Webb as a witness to the event. So Jimmy Webb appeared in court and testified in the favor of Harry Nilsson and John Lennon, and then they were released from the lawsuit.
People may ask why you know all of this, so let's kind of go back and talk about you were in Geronimo Black, you were Johnny Farfisa, you toured with Little Richard, played with Kinky Friedman and all. But then in 1971, you meet the Turtles. Well, it was really post-Turtles. You met Mark and Howard and then got involved with them. So tell us about that first meeting.
That was fantastic. Jimmy Carl Black and I had a band called Geronimo Black, which was with Bunk, Gardner, Denny Wally, Tom Levy, Jay Controlli. Anyways, Jimmy was hired by Frank Zappa to do a movie called 200 Motels, and they had rehearsals on La Cienega Boulevard. Mark Voman and Howard Kalin, a.k.a. Flo and Eddie, were in that band, and actually they sang the background vocals on a song called Lonesome Cowboy Bert that Jimmy Carl Black sings in the movie. So here I am going with Jimmy to this rehearsal. All these kick-ass musicians are there, and I get to meet Flo and Eddie. We're sitting out back smoking a joint. Of course, Frank Zappa did not allow any of his musicians to smoke. He would fine them or fire them if they smoked pot. Really, I was a big fan of Flo and Eddie. Later on at Cherokee Studios, it was a 4-track studio in Topanga Canyon where, as an example, Ricky Don't Lose That Number was recorded. I was doing a overdub on a soundtrack to a movie called Let the Good Times Roll with Little Richard. So Flo and Eddie were there in the studio doing a soundtrack for a cartoon that they made called Dirty Duck, also known as Cheap. Anyways, they were going to use Bruce Robb, who was the engineer at Cherokee Studios, but he was unavailable to go on the road. So Mark Volman came up to me and says, "Hey, listen, we need a keyboard guy. Are you available?" And I said, "Absolutely." So that's how I joined the Turtles, from meeting them in the studio. And ever since then, I played with them 46 years.
I knew it wouldn't last.
That's an amazing length of a relationship. But there is one error out there. If you take a look at Wikipedia, in the credits for the song Happy Together, it credits you as being the keyboard player. But that was 1967.
Well, they made a mistake. I joined the band in, 71. So that was after the original master was recorded. However, they've been doing a Happy Together tour for the last 4 or 5, actually since 1980. Howard Kalin, the lead singer, had some health problems and he couldn't tour on the tour. So they had Ron Dante, the lead singer from the Archies, who also produced Barry Manilow. So Ron Dante hired me to record Howard Kalin in my living room on my Pro Tools, singing Happy Together for this live album they were releasing on the road. So literally, that was the very last time that Howard Kalin recorded Happy Together in my living room.
Are you part of that Happy Together tour?
The last time I played with the Turtles was in 2012 at the Doobie Brothers Winery in Glen Ellen.
Oh, we were there. I was at that show. My wife just reminded me of that today, that we had seen them at that winery, which, Bruce used to do that every year. And it was such a great weekend with all of the artists that, 2 days sitting on the hill, listening to everybody and hanging out with them. And I remember seeing you all that. It was great.
The synchronicity is interesting between these two guys because Andy's last gig with the Turtles was right around the time that Rodney started back up with ARS.
Oh, well, yeah.
Right around the time that Andy was hot off the heels of 200 Motels and Strawberry Shortcake and other cartoon stuff that he did. Rodney was quitting ARS because of doing cartoons. And I just want to ask you, do you remember what exactly who the cartoon was that you guys... The straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak?
Yeah, it was Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kids. That's a big one, right? Yeah, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kids. I said, excuse me, what's in it for little Rodney? Well, I'll put you down in the background vocals. I went, this is not going to work out. To be honest with you, I had a daughter that had medical problems, and I was like most stupid musicians. I had no insurance. And she needed surgery, and I had to come up with money, so it was just impossible for me to hang around Atlanta.
It seemed like an interesting situation. It was almost unique. Up in Memphis, close to this time period, you have Alex Chilton and Chris Bell making the Big Star records. Mm-hmm. And while Chris was working at Ardent, I don't think that the core group of Big Star were backing other projects. Like ARS was literally like if the Swampers were trying to make it on their own while they were making all those records at Fame.
Right. That's a pretty good analogy.
I can't think of any other situation where you had an established band that went in to become a hit. Like you had the Wrecking Crew, but they weren't trying to make it as the Wrecking Crew.
Right. I can't say the knock, but a lot of people say, well, they were studio musicians. Well, we were studio musicians after the fact. You know, we'd been working with Orbison and the Candymen and JR with the Classics 4. Paul and Barry had also worked with Orbison and Lou Christie. They were part of Lou Christie's band for a while.
The studio musicians. Oh my God, so were the Eagles. Just name so many bands. That shouldn't be a knock. That should be a compliment.
Yeah, right. I think the implication was that we were like a bunch of rich old people that sat around that didn't know how to play live or what have you, which wasn't the case. I mean, we'd all, worked a lot of dates. I mean, I was 25 when I moved to Atlanta. But I mean, I've been doing it since I was 12 or 13 years old. A lot of my life by then,
I started at 14. One of the first keyboard parts I learned was the Del Shannon Runaway solo. Do, 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 do,
But you play drums too.
I played guitar, drums, bass, and keyboards. Rodney, I'm very good friends with Lou Christie.
Yeah.
Yeah, I built his website and all that stuff. He's such a cool guy.
He is a very nice guy. And I worked with him, backing him up in my band, The Mystics, when I was a kid and he had hit records. Of course, he doesn't remember it. I think he probably acted like he remembered it, trying to be nice. But but he isn't. Are you friends by any chance with Keith?
What's Keith's last name?
He was Keith. Morning sun, I say it's good to see you shine.
Oh, 98.6.
Oh, no, I never met the guy.
I asked because I haven't seen him since Betty White was jailbait, but he was doing some work with Frank Zappa at one time, and I know that you did some work with Zappa, and I thought that maybe you two knew each other.
Yeah, I did a lot of stuff with Zappa. I performed with two bands, Geronimo Black. Frank got up on stage and did his Zappa directions, and then again with Flo and Eddie and the Turtles, Zappa would come to our shows and get up on stage. And then I was very fortunate. Jimmy Carl Black and Motorhead Sherwood and I went over to Frank's house to record a song called Falling in Love is a Stupid Habit. Frank wrote the song for Jimmy Carl Black, but unfortunately, everybody died. So that was the end of that.
Oh, well, that's kind of permanent.
Tell me about 1978 when you got fired by the Turtles. What happened?
Okay, here we go. We had two keyboard players at that time. Michael Dolans was playing the synthesizers on stage left, all the strings and horns and synthesizer parts. And I was on stage right with the Wurlitzer grand piano and Hammond B3. And at that time, the budgets allowed for large bands and big budgets. And as time went on, it was too expensive to have two keyboard players. So at the same time, my wife decided to divorce me. The same week, Flo and Eddie said to me, Andy, you got to learn all the horn parts, all the string parts, all the synth parts, and still play, the piano and the organ and all that other stuff. So my chops were way down. I went over to the studio and Mark and Howard asked me to play Eleanor, so one hand was holding the rhythm on the piano, ba-dum, dum, dum, dum. And in the second verse, there's this synthesizer part, ba-dum, 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 ba, ba, ba. Anyhow, I failed the audition. I couldn't hack it. I was all freaking out from my divorce, and my chops were down. I was busy mowing lawns and shit. It was just a bad time. So Mark and Howard said to me, Andy, we love you, but we can't use you right now. The same week, my wife took my kids to Arizona. It was the same week the Turtles said, you're fired.
But they brought you back.
And they brought me back after I did my demo doctor business with Jimmy Webb and Harry Nilsson and Eric Carmen and all these really great artists.
Hey, Rodney, you got to tell this story. Didn't you get caught by somebody sneaking in through the gate to go see Elvis one time?
Oh, no, that was just... I got caught sneaking into the Ryder Cup.
Oh. I thought those two stories are connected. Dave Anderson threw me for a loop.
Hell no, that was in Spain, man. They threw me out. That's a long story, man, but it'll crack you up. But I did go see Elvis in 1956. I went to see Elvis.
That was your first show, right?
The first show I ever went to. I go see Elvis. Now, you got to remember, in the 50s, people did not cuss in public, especially around children. I think it cost maybe $1 to see the show. Max $1.50 to see Elvis. There's this man walking around selling autographed pictures of Elvis Presley, and they were 55 cents. I had 30 cents is all I had. So I stopped this guy. I say, hey, I got to have one of those pictures. Make sure you save me a picture. All right. He'd be walking around. I'd see the guy later on and say, hey, don't forget, you got to save me one of these pictures. My mother comes, I'm going to get another quarter so I can get that picture. This went on and on. Finally, the guy he says, forget the 25 cents. Here's the picture. And he says, someday you're going to talk your way out of hell. And which is like, hell? Nobody said hell around kids in those days. And I have that picture right here in my office. And the person that, I didn't know it at the time, who gave me the picture was Colonel Tom Parker.
Oh.
So that's pretty cool. He told me, someday you'll talk your way out of hell.
And how old were you?
I was 11.
Oh, my goodness.
Don't Be Cruel had just come out, and I hadn't heard it. The girl was next to me. I'd heard Hound Dog, but the flip side, I think, was Don't Be Cruel. And she would say, oh, please, he's going to sing Don't Be Cruel, Don't Be Cruel. I was going, what the hell is she talking about? I had no idea. And the kids were like standing up on the chairs and everything. And my mother told me, she says, if those kids start running towards the stage, you don't do that. And I went, well, why would I do that? I had no idea what the heck she was talking about.
Oh, unbelievable. Let's move on to ARS. And when you come back to the band.
Yeah.
Was that a good transition for you coming back? How difficult was it? What kind of reaction do you get from the fans, both then and today?
When I came back, I hadn't sung a note in over 25, 28 years, something like that. I'll tell you what happens originally. Andy Anderson was a great guy, and he'd been singing with the band for years. He had a heart attack, and they called me and asked me to fill in. I says, no, man, I don't sing anymore. I haven't sung in forever. He said, please, you got to do it. No, I can't do it. Ox asked me a couple more times. All right, I'll do it. And I'm going, why did I say I would do this? I got to learn all these songs. Oh, my gosh, what am I going to do? In addition to that, one of the songs they now did in the show was a song called The Ballad of Lois Malone. Now, I'd never done the song. I've never been good at learning songs in the first place. So I says, you know what I'll do? I'll write the words down on a piece of paper, and I'll put them on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
All right, no problem. Well, there were two problems. One, I couldn't say Lois Malone. I kept saying Moses Malone, the basketball player.
Lefty Drizel hates you for that.
Right. The other problem that I hadn't thought of was when I looked down, I couldn't see the words. It was too far away from me. Now, but I also have to tell you, we get ready for sound check. And, well, what do you want to do? I says, I don't know. What do you do first? I say, back up against the wall. All right. So we start doing back up against the wall. And I tell you, in all humility, it was like I had never stopped singing. I'm not saying I was good as I was, but I mean, I wasn't standing with my hands by my side like Donald Trump at a press conference. You know, I felt comfortable in terms of not looking like some out-of-place schmagegi up there, you know?
And as the last man standing, do you feel a heavy burden to carry on this awesome legacy of the band?
You know, to be honest with you, I never felt out of place. When I came back, I didn't feel like I didn't belong, if that makes sense to you. Now, you got to remember, I also came back in 1983 for a year. It didn't work out. I was there for a year and had an opportunity to record with Chips Moman, who didn't like me and I didn't like him. So that just didn't happen. I went my way. Paul Goddard left the same day as me.
Wow.
He quit the same day as me and came back the same day as me. So it was a lot of fun to think that half of the band, after 46 years, something like that, was going to be original. You know, I think that we made the transition from being a band to being an act. There's a big difference.
The way Paul played, it had such a unique sound to his bass.
No doubt.
Did he do anything special to get that sound?
He was very peculiar about his setup. Played a Rickenbacker. Of course, at one time, we first started out, he didn't play a Rickenbacker, he played a Fender. And if you listen to the very first song on the very first Atlanta Rhythm Section album, it's a song called, I can't remember what it's called, but Love Me Just a Little Sometimes. Paul's bass just jumps out of the grooves. To me, that's the first thing you notice is Paul's bass playing.
Very unique.
He had very peculiar taste in equipment. Of course, Paul thought everything he had was the best. It wasn't, but he said it was, you know.
Right. Well, they always do.
Right.
Yeah. Hey, speaking of peculiar taste, Andy, you worked with Grace Slick a bit, didn't you?
We hung out every night for the tour that we did during the Red Octopus album. Flo and Eddie opened up the show for the Jefferson Starship. As you well know, Flo and Eddie did a lot of satire, and one of the really funny skits they did, George Harrison did the Dark Horse tour where he lost his voice.
Yeah.
So we did a skit about My Sweet Lord, where Mark Volman plays the part of George Harrison, and he goes, My Sweet Lord, and his voice is cracking up. I would play the part of Billy Preston. So Mark Volman would crack his voice and they couldn't sing My Sweet Lord. So Howard would point to me and say, Take it, Billy. What happened was while Mark was doing his little skit, Marty Ballin from the Jefferson Starship would be my makeup man and help me put on a big black afro wig and these gigantic Hollywood sunglasses with dollar signs in the glasses.
Oh, yeah. I remember those.
And so I played the part of Billy Preston, and I did the opening piano part for Nothing Is Nothing. We would play to these 50, 60,000 people venues. And right after I do that little intro, I jump up to the front of the stage and hold up both hands in a peace sign, you know, and the whole stadium would go nuts. So that was my little highlight working with Jefferson Starship. But Grace Slick and I became really, really good friends. Skip Johnson, her boyfriend, and I would go up to Grace's room every night, smoke a joint, and she would drink whatever she was drinking, and we'd stay up all night and laugh and tell stories. And she was just unbelievably fantastic. Love her.
Well, Ambrosia did a show with Marty was up in Mohican, and it was just fascinating to be able to play those songs. You got to hang out, Andy, backstage with Lou Reed also, right?
Oh, that was great. That was in Melbourne, Australia. He was playing at the same venue we were. We were all in the hotel lobby, and we took the elevator to go to our rooms. Lou's girlfriend, which was really a boyfriend, she was like a transsexual, whatever. Her name was Rachel. So Lou said, Hey, you want to come up to the room? I said, sure. So I went up to the top of the hotel there, the penthouse, went into Lou's room with Rachel, and we just sat around, talked about the early days in Greenwich Village, you know, Velvet Underground and Andy Warhol and all the incredible music that was taking place at that time. And Lou was just a really nice guy. And then that night when we played the concert, he asked Flo and Eddie to get up on stage and sing the background parts on All the Children Go, Doot, 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 you know.
Yeah, Walk on the Wild Side.
Right, Walk on the Wild Side. So it was great meeting Lou Reed. Yeah, he's in my book. Got some really great pictures.
Rodney,
Yeah.
You know the music of Seals and Crofts.
Mm-hmm.
But did you know who it was that recommended they call themselves Seals and Crofts?
Let me guess. Andy?
That would be the man.
Oh, my God. Oh, my. I'm physic.
Rodney, speaking of stories that go in a book, tell us about the time you ended up drinking with Paul McCartney.
That's a good story. In 1967, incidentally, was on that same exact tour was Happy Together came out. It was around Easter of 67. I say it came out in England because Dean Daughtry turned to me and went, Justy, that's a #1 record right there. I'm telling you, I guarantee you, that's a #1 record. And to this day, he will tell you, you know, I told you I was a #1 record. I knew it was going to be a #1 record. Anyway, I'm a kid. I'm 21 years old. I'm so excited. I'm going to England. It's like from Tampa, Florida. Who the hell thought this was ever going to happen to me? The rest of the band, they decided to go to sleep. Robert Nix and I go out to a club called the Bag of Nails, which Jimmy Page had recommended to us while we were in Australia. And like I told you, I'm not very pushy by nature. So we go to this club called the Bag of Nails, and they don't want to let us in. I'm sorry, so this is a private club, sir. So Robert Nix is like, well, Jimmy Page told us to come by, and they go, oh, right this way, sir. Like it was a different world. So we go in, and you go downstairs, and the Beatles had just recorded the first music video ever. They did Strawberry Fields and Penny Lane, which I had not seen. And the week before we go to England, we're playing a venue in Alabama. And a guy comes up to me and said, man, did you see the Beatles on TV? I went, no, I worked. I didn't get a chance to see it. He said, man, like Paul's got a mustache and John Lennon's wearing these round glasses. I was thinking, oh, that's weird. So I'm standing downstairs in the Bag of Nails. This guy who's the manager, who's a black guy, by the way, he said, hello, how are you, sir? And I'm going, I never heard a black guy talk like this before. What the heck is going on? As he's talking to me, I see this guy walking down the stairs, and everybody looked like they're famous to me, This guy was glowing. He was shining. I said, this guy looks familiar. The manager of the club says, there's the governor. I said, governor? He's a lot bigger than a governor. He says, would you like to meet him? Because we'd been talking with him. He knew he worked with Roy Orbison. So Paul comes over and introduces himself, walks up to me, says, hello, Paul McCartney. I said, what was that name again?
Who are you?
He looks at me and kind of smiles. And Robert Nix, our drummer, goes, why, hellfire, damn, man, hell, I don't know what I should do. I don't know if I should bow. I don't know if I should kiss your feet. And Paul McCartney looks at me and like rolls his eyes and goes, oh, my God, this is embarrassing. We sit and we talk for a while. He asks about Roy. And we talk. He's very generous with his time. He asks us to go. We sit down, have a drink. We go back to the room. I'm so excited. I can't believe I met Paul McCartney. So I'm shaking the guys. I'm going, wake up. You guys are not going to believe who we met. Met Paul McCartney. We had a drink with him. He's talking. I don't know why they would have believed me, except for I was so excited. I guess they thought that I was telling the truth. So now the guitar player, who had a real deep voice, he says, I want to go, boy. I want to meet him, too. I'm going, yeah, all right. So we go back to the Bag of Nails. Next night, no McCartney. Now, we're getting ready to leave for about 4 or 5 days. And we go back to the Bag of Nails. And in one of the booths, a guy lights a match to light a cigarette. And I can see it's Paul McCartney. There he is right there, John Rainey. I got to meet him, man. Oh, okay. So he goes to leave, and he's walking up the stairs. And I go, excuse me, Paul. He goes, I know, Rodney with the Candymen. I'm thinking, oh, my God, this is so cool. So I'm getting ready to introduce him to the guitar player. So, well, he can't embarrass me like the drummer did with the, hey, man, oh, God, I don't know what to kiss your feet. Should I bow or whatever? So Paul McCartney is walking up the stairs, so he's taller than us. And he looks at us and says, hey, Paul. He says, I know, Rodney with the Candymen. That's our guitar player, John Rainey, wanted to meet you. John Rainey goes, I don't know what to say. Paul says, try hello. He says, hello. He says, no, how are you doing? He says, how are you doing? He says, gotta run. He takes off. Gotta run. No kidding, you gotta run.
Well, we got lots of Beatles stuff going on tonight. Andy, you had Ringo over your house, didn't you?
Back in 1969, I was in my Hollywood apartment. I had a premonition, and I was thinking, like a daydream, that a Beatle came over to my house, and he sat next to me, and he took his shoes off. That was his premonition. And then later on in 1992 or 93, Harry Nilsson and I invited Ringo to come over to my living room to record some children's stories that Harry and I and Van Dyke Parks were going to do the music background for Ringo reading these children's books, like Billy Goat's Gruff and all these really popular children's books. Ringo comes into the house and Harry comes in, and I said, Ringo, okay, here you can sit here and all this stuff. and he was sitting right next to me, and it was a very hot day, and I had to actually turn off the air conditioner in my living room so it wouldn't pick up on the recording. Ringo sat next to me, and then he reaches down and takes off his shoes. So my premonition actually came true. The highlight of that whole recording session was at the end. Ringo would tell stories about the Beatles. The most amazing story I heard that Ringo was talking about was the Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band name. The real story is that Paul McCartney was on an airplane with Mal Evans, the road manager for the Beatles. And Paul was saying to Mal, hey, I'm trying to think of a name for this mysterious band that is not the Beatles, some other band. And we're going to try to do a different kind of an album where it's not the Beatles, it's a pretend band. And what do you think? And so Mal Evans says, well, why don't you call it Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band? And that's literally how the title was created on that airplane.
Wow.
We were recording at Abbey Road with Graham Nash, and we were using the Beatles equipment. We went back like the next day, and I think it was Robert and we heard the tracks from Sgt. Pepper. Now, I must tell you, we didn't know that there were the tracks from Sgt. Pepper, but George Martin was mixing some stuff back there, and you could hear the boom, doom, 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 and you heard a clarinet going doo 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 doo, and we're going. That's part of the. He said that's part of the Beatles' new record, and we're going with the clarinet in it and a stupid little silly bass part. When I'm 64 is what we heard. Like I said, before the record was even out, we heard him mixing it.
Wow. So there was quite a bit of interesting recording that's going on in your house, Andy. You recorded Nilsson there for his last recordings. Let's hear the story about that.
Wait, isn't there some controversy about that too?
Yeah, that's what I want to hear about.
What happened was there was an event at the Universal City Studios. It was called the Alice Cooper Clarence Clemens Oktoberfest. And Flo and Eddie had their own radio show on K-Rock after Howard Stern in New York. So for this event, they had about 30 tents set up at the amphitheater, and 30 different radio stations from across the country would set up their mobile trucks with their satellite dishes and broadcast interviews with all these celebrities. Mark Volman hired me to drive a limousine and pick up all these celebrities and take them to the tent. And I'd have my keyboard at the tent. And so we would do Happy Together with whatever celebrity was there. And then we would do the celebrities hit record. Bobby Hatfield came and we did Unchained Melody, and Eric Burden came and we did We Gotta Get Out of This Place, and Dean Torrance came and we did Barbara Ann, just a whole bunch of people. So one of the guests was Harry Nilsson. So I drove out to Agora Hills and I picked up Harry. I opened up the back door of the limo and he says, nah, I'm going to sit up front with you. So we sat on the 405 freeway in traffic trying to get to Universal. He would tell me all these amazing, amazing stories about the Beatles. He put out his Pandemonium Shadow Show album, which had a medley of Beatles songs. He was working for the Bank of America at that time, and Paul McCartney and John Lennon both called him at the bank and invited him to come to England to hang out at Abbey Road. So Harry and I became really, really good friends. We did a Dillard song on the radio show, and he sang Happy Together with us. Then I was driving him home, and he invited me to a office that he owned, the company called Hawkeye, which was a script company for motion pictures and television. And so he actually stopped. He sold his guitar and he sold his piano. He wasn't playing music anymore. He was literally into the script business. So I said, hey, Harry, come on. You're Harry. You're supposed to, how about let's come over to my studio and let's do some music. And so he was all excited, and he did. We were like high school buddies. We would hang out till 4 o'clock in the morning and drive around in his Mercedes and sing all of his songs at the top of our lungs. And we ended up recording 35 songs in my studio. And the very last song we recorded, Mark Hudson was there. Harry said at the session, he says, Mark, I want you to make sure that if anything happens to me, that Andy gets 10% of whatever stuff we record. Well, Harry passed away, and Mark, 20 years later, takes the recordings that I made, pulls all my work off of them, and just uses the vocals of Harry and puts out an album which just came out called Lost and Found. And most of the album is all my work, but Mark Hudson pulled all of my work off and put his own mixes on there. So it's really unfortunate.
Hold on a second. I'm downloading it right now.
So when the Washington Post says that the Nilsson recorded What Does a Woman See in a Man at a friend's house in 93, they're talking about you?
Yes. What happened was Harry said, we're going to go to Record One Studios on Ventura Boulevard in Studio City. And Linda Ronstadt was co-producing an album for Jimmy Webb. So Harry and I went over there. Harry says, I want to do that song, What Does a Woman See in a Man? So let's go over to Andy's studio and have you put down the keyboard. So Jimmy said, okay. And we went to this little spaghetti place. I forgot what it's called, and had some lunch. And then we went to my studio. I had a Ensoniq Performance Sampler plastic synthesizer keyboard. And of course, Jimmy Webb said, ain't no way I'm playing that piece of shit. It's not a piano.
No way. I've had to do backline for Jimmy Webb. He will not play that. No way.
Yeah, he didn't. He refused. He absolutely refused to play the plastic keyboard because it doesn't have...
He needs a C7 is what he needs. Minimum.
Yeah, he wanted a real live piano with piano action so he can get the dynamics of that piano playing. So Harry and I kept on bugging him and torturing him until, he finally agreed. So he did put down the piano part, and then Harry and I drove him back to the Linda Ronstadt session. Then Harry and I came back to the house, and Harry laid down an incredible vocal, and I put down the cello and violin and French horn. We came out with a wonderful demo. But then, of course, Mark Hudson took that demo, and he removed all of my work, and he kept Jimmy Webb's piano part, and then he changed the octaves on it, and he did all this weird shit. So it's just a bummer that happened.
Speaking of studio encounters and stuff like that happening, Rodney, your musical career was spent in the studio down in Doraville. And do you remember any crazy encounters that happened back then, or people's tracks getting erased without them knowing, or anything like that?
We just played in Palm Springs, and I hadn't been there in many, many, many years. There was a guy named Chris Houston who had an album of Who tracks. And I remember hearing about Peter Townsend going crazy about that. And I ran into Chris. I knew him from New York, and I ran into him in Palm Springs. I mean, that's the saddest story I ever heard about, messing up tracks. But we never had any incidents like that. We were pretty well organized. We had Rodney Mills as an engineer, and you play a tough time finding somebody more organized than Rodney Mills.
Well, BJ lost a bunch of tracks in the Universal fire. Do you have any old BJ recordings, like original things? Because those would probably be worth something now.
No, I don't think so. I don't know what's happened to those things. In fact, we asked Rodney. He probably has all those old masters hidden away somewhere, but he doesn't remember where.
There's some ARS tracks that have you on it, and then there's alternative versions, aren't there?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, there's scratch tracks. I laughed one time when I hadn't seen Rodney Mills in years. And I was singing a song called Baby Don't Lie. And I could see in the control room, while I'm trying to sing, I'm looking up there, and Buddy, they're telling jokes and carrying on back there and raising hell. And I started singing like Jerry Lewis.
Buddy Buie was there too?
Yeah, Buddy Buie, he was the producer. So I just started singing like Jerry Lewis, like, nobody even noticed it. They were so in their own thing, they weren't paying any attention to what I was doing.
How important was Buddy to ARS's success?
Oh, you kidding? There's nobody Buie, there's no ARS. He was everything to the band. He saw Atlanta Rhythm Section as a vehicle for his songs, as if he could sing. He wanted you to sing like he could sing if he could sing. It's hard to explain, but that's what he did. If you walked out there, sang one of his songs, at least with me, in one take, his feeling was, if he can do that in one take, imagine what he can do after 5 or 6 hours. And then it would just work you and work you and work you. The exception was B.J. Thomas. B.J. Thomas recorded a song called Most of All. Hello, darling, it's good to see you. He walked out there. I think he sang it one time, and that was it. We showed him the song. He walked up and sang it. End of conversation. We'd never seen anything like it. Seriously, it was miraculous.
Dean's retirement this past year, he's doing okay, just didn't want to go on the road anymore.
Yeah, the road had literally beat the crap out of him. He didn't quite make it 50 years. If he would have made it till like next month, he would have completed 50 years. He just couldn't do it.
Well, it's not like ARS has a pension or anything, does
no,
it?
No, are you kidding me? A pension. A penchant. Penchant. We had a penchant for acting like fools in the old days,
Well, speaking of acting like fools, we haven't talked about Roy too much, and I wanted to talk a little bit about this. I knew he was fond of automobiles. Did he ever try to buy a car off somebody while you guys were on the road?
Oh, man, I'll tell you a story. We were in Atlanta, Georgia. We'd been on the road for a long time. We were in Atlanta, Georgia, in this place called Capital Chevrolet. $100 down in 1966, and you drive off with your Corvette tomorrow. So I went, oh, looky here. We all looked at each other and went, we're in. So 5 of us went.
Wow.
To get a new Corvette. The idea was we'd give them $100, and when everything be taken care of, we could drive out home the next day. When you're buying 5 Corvettes, you can get a hell of a deal. So we walked up, and it turns out they couldn't have the cars ready for us the next day, and we all had to get home. The only one that could stay was Orbison, and Orbison got that 1966 Corvette for the 5 Corvette price. Okay, none of us got the car, and he got one, a very cheap, beautiful car, green 1966 Corvette.
Wow.
We were at the Corvette Museum. Dean and I were I think it's in Bowling Green.
Yeah, up in Kentucky. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. They just had a big sinkhole. It swallowed up all those cars. But we went by. Oh, my God, look at it. My God, there's Roy's picture. And we looked, there's Roy's picture behind the Corvette. Then we walked to the side, and it's Roy's Corvette. That's a picture of him and his wife in the Corvette. It was Roy Orbison's Corvette.
His Corvette is actually up at the museum?
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. We're running low on time. I want to get to one more story with Rodney, and then I'm going to let Alan close it out with Andy. Can you just tell us about, I'll just call it the joke story with Roy?
Oh.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Roy was not much of a talker, but he would tell the corniest jokes you could possibly think of. Like, well, I got a frog in my throat, and it's the best meal I've had all day. I just flew in. My arms are still tired. He used to do one. He would say, normally I travel with the bigger band, but we crossed the border into Florida. We had a fruit inspection, and these are the only fellers that made it. He would tell jokes like that. Even did one, I'd like y'all to know that Bill Gilmore, a bass player, his wife just presented him with a bouncing baby boy. I'd like the proud father to please take a bow. And we would all take a bow. So we were always, I don't know why he didn't fire us. We pulled a lot of jokes on him, man. And one day I decided to tell all of his jokes before he came out. We did a set before he came out. So I told every one of his jokes. Then he came out and told the same joke. It was like crickets out there. There was not one sound in the audience when he started telling the jokes I've already told. Awesome. Oh, it was beautiful.
Andy, you toured with Little Richard.
Yeah.
I've got to believe that there was a million amazing Little Richard stories.
Yes, absolutely. Well, first of all, when I first met Little Richard, it was on the stage. Bumps Blackwell, who co-wrote Tutti Frutti and Good Golly, Miss Molly. He rehearsed the band just verbally, because everybody knew all these songs. If you don't know a Little Richard song, Yeah, I don't know what to say. Anyhow.
Get out of the business.
Yeah. We're at this Philadelphia stadium with about 60, 70,000 people. No rehearsal. I'm on the Hammond B3. And Little Richard comes storming out, starting off with Tutti Frutti. And it was so much energy and so much excitement. I was completely blown away. One of the highlights of that whole Little Richard story, Little Richard and Chuck Berry were hired to play at the Grammys in 1974. What they needed was Little Richard and Chuck Berry to sing their hit records, but to change the lyrics of the record to the nominee's name. So instead of Tutti Frutti or Rudy, it was Al Green, he's clean. And so they changed all the lyrics to their hits. The only rehearsal, this guy named Ray Charles, who is not the black singer Ray Charles, but a white guy who was the producer of the Grammys, he says, Andy, would you sit there and work out these songs with Little Richard and Chuck Berry? So I was like the music director for the Grammys. We sat in this tiny, tiny little room with an upright piano, and Chuck brought his guitar, and we went song by song. So it was just me, Little Richard, and Chuck Berry working on these songs. And I'm saying to myself, oh my God. I mean, the reason I became a musician was because of the Beatles. And of course, John Lennon idolized Chuck Berry, and Paul McCartney idolized Little Richard. And it was like a full circle. You know, here I am with Little Richard and Chuck Berry doing this rehearsal. So the show went really good, except for Richard's mic broke and he had to take Chuck's mic. But it was really a great show. I got to meet Gladys Knight and Andy Williams and Paul Simon and Stevie Wonder, and it was just wonderful. One other really great event, when we went to Australia to play with Little Richard, I was with two groupies in my hotel room, and the phone rings and Little Richard says, hey Andy, come on up to the penthouse, I want to talk to you. So I said okay, and I told the girls, hey listen, just hang out for a minute, I gotta go talk to Richard. So I go up to the penthouse, and his brother Peyton Penniman was standing there with his arms folded, like a bodyguard, and Richard took his wig off, and he just had a black silk scarf around his forehead, and he sat on the edge of the bed, and I was standing there in front of him, and he looks up at me with these googly eyes, and he asked me to do something, and I looked at him and I said, what? Little Richard, I got two girls down in my room. I don't think I can do this. And so he just kind of just looked at me, and I left the room and went back to the girls. I really can't say what he asked me, because if I did, his estate would sue me.
God.
So I can't really.
You could have been Mr. Richard.
I could have, yes, yeah.
So much for a family show.
Real quick, you mentioned that his microphone broke, and I just wanted to kind of throw this to each of you. What is like the most nerve-wracking moment you've had to deal with during a live performance?
I've been cursed for the past couple of years with the hum that it shows up every once in a while. Like, you're trying to sing, and you hear this note just drive you crazy. Especially if there's a concrete stage, I get a lot of that. But for the most part, I've been around a long time. I just keep singing. There's nothing you can do. What's the point of complaining if people don't care? Just do, I tell everybody, do your job. Don't worry about that. Don't worry about the guitar player being too loud. The other guy's not loud enough. You can't hear the drum. It doesn't matter. Do your part.
Man, that's a pretty charmed life if all you had to worry about was not seeing your words one time and then a hum on the stage. That's
Look, I've had an unbelievable life. I got no complaints. It's hard to believe, isn't it, Andy? Think about it.
Oh, man, I tell you, my most embarrassing moment ever, I was with the Turtles, and we were doing a television show, pilot, called Sunset Strip, and it featured the unknown comic who wore a bag over his face, Murray Langston.
Mm-hmm.
I had a problem with this picking my mustache. The actual name of this mental disorder is called trichotillomania. That means when you pick your mustache, and you actually pull the hairs out of your mustache. By the time I was there at the studio to do this, we were going to do Eleanor or Happy Together or one of those. I picked half my mustache off, and it looked like shit. I went to the makeup girl, and I says, do you have a mustache I can borrow? And so, oh, yeah, no problem. So she pulled out a really, really nice mustache, and we got the glue, and we put the mustache on my lip, and I looked terrific. I looked like Geraldo Rivera. So it was really cool. So we're doing the shoot. We're on the stage. The hot lights are blaring down on me, and I'm on the Hammond B3, and we're doing the song. And then my mustache falls off halfway. So it's like hanging down across my lip, you know? And so I raised my hands in the middle of us recording this set. And I raise my hands and wave them. I say, stop, my mustache fell off. And so everybody looks at me. And, Flo and Eddie look at me with these dagger eyes. What the fuck are you doing? So anyhow, got the mustache. The makeup lady came and glued the mustache back on my face. And then we finished the recording. And I'm glad I wasn't fired from the band.
So you've seen that on a million different TV comedies over the years, but it really happened for real to you.
It sure did.
That's an awesome story. And hey, if you guys want to hear or read about more awesome stories from Andy, where can they get your book, Andy?
It is called The Most Famous Musician You've Never Heard Of. And my name is Andy Cahan. It's Cahan. And it's available on Amazon.com, or you could go on to Facebook and you'll find me, or you can email me at andycahan@gmail.com. I'm selling autographed copies. It's a great book. It's 344 pages.
Lots of pictures.
One-of-a-kind pictures of every celebrity you can possibly shake a stick at.
Rodney, if people want to check out ARS, hopefully there'll be more concerts if this corona epidemic ever ends. What's the website for ARS these days?
AtlantaRhythmSection.com.
Well, guys, it's really been a treat to have you on and hear about some of these amazing stories and experiences that you've had in your lives, and thanks for sharing some of them with us.
Thanks for inviting me.
It was a lot of fun, Rodney. I loved hearing your stories.
Same here.
You guys have been awesome.
Soft Pass is a Wiggle the Wire audio production. We'd like to thank our bus drivers, Kent C. Straight and Miles Tugo, our audio advisors, Stereo Blaren and Microphone, studio lights by Annie Position, our house electrician is Maxwell Power, our union steward, Manny Kin, our monitor engineer, Tad Moore, our music transposer, Betty Dropped It, our staff bartenders, Ryan Koch and Brandy Decanter, our bluegrass music supervisor, Amanda Lynn, our accountant, Owen Cash, our cleanup crew supervisor, Armand Hammer, catering by Candace Spencer and Bill Loney, our valet, Ford Parker, and our guitar tech, Rusty Steele. For Alan Tillis, I'm John Michaels saying thanks for listening.
This has been Soft Pass. Find us on Facebook at Soft Pass Podcast. Special thanks to Blue Microphones and the law firm of Schulman Rogers. Theme music by the Sam Yannis Band. Join us again next time for more stories about the entertainment industry.